Hello and welcome to Fresh Perspectives. My name is Gail, and my guest today is the famous Bill Kuwik, and our topic for today is the dangers of using toxic gardening products. Thank you, Bill, for coming on again. You're such a good sport about helping me out with Fresh Perspectives here.
We should just co-host.
Except that you're not available all of the Saturdays.
Right.
That's the thing of it.
Exactly. Yeah, well, I'm no expert at this because I don't really use chemicals in my garden at all, or landscaping or anything like that, which is kind of ironic. I think I told you before that my old dog ended up getting lymphatic cancer, which, if you look it up, the main cause is from lawn chemicals, and I haven't used a lawn chemical in my life.
Right, but it was there from somebody else.
Well, I believe it's like neighbors of mine upstream from me, because I have a stream that goes through my property. So there's one guy just a few doors up from me, and I noticed he uses Roundup in his ditch and underneath his fences, and I can't say that is what did it, but yeah, my
There's
dog.
There's a pretty good chance.
Yeah, it was like within a year of me moving to this house that this dog, who was like 8, ended up with, well, he was 7 when I moved there, and he ended up, at 8, ended up with lymphatic cancer. But yeah, and something I was talking with a friend this morning. We just know that, like, I read up on like another, like, Roundup, atrazine is a very widespread used defoliant, like an herbicide, and it's been used like all over the world, but it's banned now in France and most of Europe.
I know. I know a lot of things, a lot of toxic things are banned in most other countries,
right,
but not here.
Right. And then you'll hear a lot of times, oh, don't buy fruit from Mexico or Costa Rica because they use all kinds of nasty chemicals. But it's the chemical companies in the United States that are selling them because they can't use them here anymore. So it makes them those countries, don't buy from those countries. It's like, but those countries are buying the chemicals from us. But yeah, the atrazine was causing birth defects. It was causing health problems in humans, and they were saying it's building up. It's building up in the environment. And one thing I just remembered this morning, way back in about 1984, a friend of mine was a pollution control inspector in Onondaga County near Syracuse, and he told me that scientists were finding that at that point, you don't even hear about PCB anymore. You ever hear about PCBs? Remember in the 70s and 80s, everything was PCBs, there's PCBs and everything?
Yeah, well, there's some of that stuff. It depends on where you get your information. Some of that stuff is still being talked about, if you know what sources to look it up
I'm sure
on.
it's still there. It didn't go away. It's just that you don't hear about it like in the media like we used to in the 70s and 80s. But back then, my friend said that the scientists were finding that every organism on the planet that they tested had PCB in them. So they thought, well, where would be like the most isolated place on the planet where maybe the organisms didn't have PCBs? So they took fish from the deep Atlantic, North Atlantic Sea, and they had PCB in them. So he said, so in case you have any illusions, and I know that they say that today, like compared to when we were born, we didn't have all these toxic chemicals in our body. They say a baby born today has 160 carcinogenic compounds in their body when they're born. So, people wonder, how does a baby get cancer? It's like, well the parents were in that
when I
environment.
was a little girl, like in the 1950s, if you heard about a child that died,
right,
it was usually as a result of an accident.
right.
It wasn't as a disease, and now all kinds of children are having all kinds of cancers and horrible, nasty diseases.
Right,
So.
right, yeah, and people wonder, well, why do we have so much cancer? It's like, well, around here, I mean, I hate to say it, but the grapes are sprayed, and I did a class on at Dunkirk Adult Ed years ago, and it was about I think I called it vegetarian cooking to build powerful immunity to bolster the immune system. And there was a lady there that worked at Welch's, and she continued to, oh, well, Welch's they don't spray any of their grapes. I'm like, what? No, we won't. We test every bin. I'm like, every bin. Well, every truck. Well, every farm gets tested. I'm like, well, that probably doesn't really amount to anything anyway. And I know that my friends I said, I'm going to ask my friend, his family grows grapes in Westfield. So I said, I don't want to ask the question in a way that I'll get the answer I want. But I said, you guys grow grapes. You sell to Welch's, right? Yeah. I said, now, are your grapes sprayed? And if so, how often do you spray? Oh, I said, of course we spray. This was basically from, probably April, May, all the way through the season. He says, roughly every 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
That's pretty much what I thought. That's what I was trying to tell her. Oh, well, no, they don't sell to us. I'm like, they definitely sell to Welch's, but, she of course didn't want to. And then it turns out, when I asked him, I said, so do they test? He said, they test for sugar content. He said, they're not testing for pesticide. But, yeah, I mean, it's like some people say, we're out here in the country. And like my one boss in Vermont, or not in Vermont, Ohio said, everybody thinks you're out in the country, but this is all just like wasteland out here. It's just like fields and fields where chemicals have been dumped for years. And I know for a fact, like when we grow potatoes in this country conventionally, they spray arsenic and a radioactive strontium-90 onto potatoes. And they say that the arsenic, one application of arsenic, you can still measure it 30 years later.
Oh my gosh.
So these people they're planting potatoes year after year after year in the same soil. So they're spraying this arsenic multiple times. So, how good is that soil? You're eating, potatoes that have been, grown in a arsenic radioactive soup, basically.
Oh yeah. Well, I interviewed John Jablonski from the Watershed Conservancy at the beginning of the winter, and I was mentioning to him about your dog getting lymphoma that you felt came from something toxic that had washed into the stream near your house.
Right.
And he said that lymphoma is quite common in dogs who've been exposed to certain toxic substances. So
yeah, that's, like I said, I looked it up. I have a book of natural health for pets, and when I looked up what he had, lymphatic cancer, they said it typically comes from lawn chemicals. And I know, like when I actually first moved back here, like 30 some years ago, I stayed with my dad, and I found this old bag of weed feed that had been in his basement probably since the 1970s. He was like, well, why don't you spread it? Why don't you spread it? I'm like, Dad, I have my dogs here. I'm like, what am I going to do? Oh, he pouted, and I'm like, all right, I'll put it on there. I, at that point, had never read anything about those things being dangerous to pets, but it was the next summer it came out, and it was in the Dunkirk Observer, and it was an article from the UPI, and it said, one application will give your dogs a 66% greater chance of certain cancers, especially like blood and bone cancers. But they said 2 or more applications, almost 100% chance. And I know my friend Jeff, he was a farrier. He shoed horses, and he said some lady, I want to say East Aurora, he went to her place one day and comes pulling up her winding driveway, and there goes the ChemLawn truck as he's pulling up. She opens up the door, lets her dogs out, and he's like, must not care about the dogs too much. And by the end of the summer, both those dogs were dead.
Oh my gosh.
So the next spring, she gets two new dogs, same thing again. By the end of the summer, both dogs are dead, and she's just like, I don't know what's going on. I can't.
My gosh.
My friend said, well, you have the ChemLawn truck, I noticed, and then you let the dogs run on it. And she's like, well, they never told me anything about it. And
well, they're not going to, are they?
Right. They don't want to warn you that it could be dangerous.
They want to make sure they make their money. You cannot go into a hardware store or anything like that without seeing Roundup.
Oh yeah, it stinks too. I don't like walking through those places. I don't even know. I had one client.
There's this one section. Sometimes when Carol and I are out running errands together, he'll have things that he wants to get from Home Depot. And there's this one section of the store that I stay away from, because even though all of that stuff is in tightly closed containers or anything, I can still smell the fumes from them. If you go into the household cleaning section of your grocery store,
Yep.
I mean, the smell blows me away. You know, I
Well,
don't even know. Just
Value Home Center, it's like you walk in the store and the stuff's at the other end of the store. I smell it as soon as I walk in. And then one of the cashiers was coming to me with like, oh, I always get headaches when I'm at work. I'm like,
I wonder why. Yeah.
I was like, I get a headache when I walk in there and you're there for an 8-hour shift.
Now you can get paint for painting, you know, the walls in your house and stuff like that don't have any volatile organic compounds in them. But back before you could get those, you couldn't paint a room in your house without getting a headache, and the smell would blow you away. You know what I mean? It's I wanted to mention this article my husband cut out of the newspaper for me. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but anyways, I wanted to mention that it says proposal would allow local laws to regulate pesticides. And it says State Senator Pete Harcum and Assemblyman Chris Burdick want to give local governments greater authority to limit pesticide usage in local watersheds. They should be doing that all over the place, not just in the watersheds. But I'm thinking, oh, good, you know, at least there's some politicians who are wanting to limit the use of these things. You know, Rachel Carson, when she wrote her book, Silent Spring, back in the 1960s, she mentioned that the pesticides, a lot of insects were developing a resistance to pesticides.
Absolutely.
And so it really wasn't doing much good on the insects, but it was killing lots of birds.
Right. Yeah, I read just somewhere when I was researching for this that where they're growing corn, something like 16 birds die per acre when they're spraying like that. Well, you know, the birds eat
15 birds per acre?
Per acre, yeah.
Wow.
15 or 16 birds per acre. But and the thing is, you know, they're saying that the whole idea was that, well, we can't raise enough food without pesticides or herbicides or chemical fertilizers. But from the stuff,
I think it's been proven that you can.
oh yeah, absolutely,
You know,
100%.
I mean,
you know, and the whole thing is, I think we've talked about this on a previous show, but Elliot Coleman told us that he heard that it was after World War II that the U.S. scientists were put to task to try to figure out a way for us to develop something where we could have the chemicals that we needed to make gunpowder on hand at all times, and high nitrogen fertilizer. We know, like Timothy McVeigh blew up the federal building in Oklahoma or whatever with barrels full of high nitrogen fertilizer.
He was one of the people that actually wound up getting executed, I believe.
Was he?
Yeah, I think I heard that they killed him. Yeah.
Well, I don't remember how many people died in that, but yeah, I mean,
even children, because there was a daycare center for the employees, children that weren't old enough to go to school or something like that. So a lot of children were killed.
But again, too, like all of these, like pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and the chemical fertilizers, they're all made from petrochemicals, so it all comes from petroleum. So the whole petroleum industry, of course, encourages this stuff and discourages us from using organic methods because, and you know, it's all there at the store. Like you said, you walk into any hardware store, there's just every product you can think of to kill something. And it is interesting though too, because the one article I sent to you, he says in there, he says, you know, that was the whole idea that you have to have this to keep the fields clean, to keep the bugs out. But they said sometimes the pesticides don't even really kill the bugs or kill very many of them. And I've actually seen times in my own fields where I would have liked to have used an organic pesticide, but I didn't have it, and I'm busy at work, so I don't have time to go and get it. and within 3 or 4 days they go away anyway. I mean, without doing anything. So I think we as humans think like, ooh, problem, I need to solve this problem. So I'll go to the store, buy this product, and then by the time you get it and spray it, oh, see, the bugs went away. But they probably would have went away whether you sprayed them or not. So I think a lot of times it's just, we're brainwashed into thinking that we need to use all these things, and they're saying that the thing is that like you're saying, bugs have become resistant to it. They weren't really as effective in the first place, the pesticides. So now they have to make stronger pesticides. Pesticides are more expensive, and they have to use more of it because they're not working. And then the soil is getting depleted too. And I wanted to mention, I told a friend of mine, she sent me a thing. You know who Sadhguru is? He's a Indian guru that spent like 30 years in meditation. Now he's out and about. And, his big thing was, he was saying the other day that he says we're talking about, everybody's talking about global warming and climate change and all that, but he really said that we really have to stop with the herbicides. But he said it's destroying the soil, and we've all known we've lost. There was originally like 80 inches of topsoil all over this country when it was first starting to be farmed, and we're at dangerously low levels. I mean, they're saying organic matters are under like 1%, and you need a minimum of 3 to 6%. Is the minimum, should be 3%. 3% doesn't sound like a lot of compost to put into some soil. And just as a side note, when I planted my blueberries where they are, I did take a soil test in to have it tested, and 24% organic matter is what I had in my soil, and they want you to have a minimum of 3%. So I was like 8 times over what they considered to be the minimum. So that's a lot of compost. I mean, I did a lot.
Well, speaking of the dangers of these toxic products, there was a book I meant to bring in to show, just so I could recommend it, but I went and it was one of those things like where, I was in a big hurry because I needed to get to the post office before I came here because they close at noon on Saturdays.
Right.
So anyway, I forgot it. But I'm going to mention the name of the book, and I'm not remembering the name of the author. But it's been around for several years, and the name of it is The World According to Monsanto. Now, Bill's probably going to say something about Bayer bought out Monsanto, but still the information in it is still, you can still learn the truth about what can happen if you use these products. And in the book, they tell all of these stories about these toxic things that were sold to all of these foreign countries and everything, and how certain children and like that would die within a short period of time after crops bordering their lawns where they lived, how they would die a short while later from the poisoning from these products. And technically, you see people using these things all the time, just out in their regular clothing.
Absolutely.
But it's my understanding, according to this book and other things that I've read, that if you're going to use that stuff, technically you're supposed to be wearing a hazmat suit.
Yeah. Well, that's the bizarre thing I saw here one time, and I know, like in Europe, like if you see a grape sprayer going through the grapes here, they just have the
what? Mary Monique Robin is the name of the author.
Okay.
He looked it up. He checked it out on the internet after I mentioned it. Mary Monique Robin wrote The World According to Monsanto. She had to travel all over the world to interview people in order to write the book. It was a really hard job for her.
But what I was going to say is that they have the sprayer nozzles spray up underneath the leaves, so they get the undersides of the leaves here. And you go through a field and you'll see the plume of the spray going, 15, 20 feet above the grapes.
I have seen it. I have seen it
you know what they
when
do
when I'm driving down the road through
and then the wind
like
blows
the
and it
Westfield
just-
area. Yeah, I've seen
What they
it.
do in Europe is they actually have a hood that goes over the top of the grapes, so the spray goes through the grapes. It actually collects in the hood, it drips back down, and they pick it back up and they recycle it. Here, it just sprays all over the place. We don't do that. We don't collect it. But one time I was on my way to Chautauqua to work, and it was somewhere along like Ellicott Road or Webster Road, Brockton, Portland area, and I saw the farmer inside the booth on his tractor. He was completely enclosed in glass, wearing the full hazmat suit. I thought, wow, you don't see that often.
Oh, wow.
But,
Yeah.
but just like you were saying, right at the end of his grape rows, there was a little boy in a swing set and shorts and a T-shirt. I'm like, how much sense does that make? The farmer is dressed in the hazmat suit, but the boy that's 20 feet
And
from his
completely
grape,
enclosed in
yeah,
this
he was an enclosed
thing that
enclosed
he's
booth like that.
driving, the sprayer thing.
But I have seen it once when I used to farm up by Scott Foley's up on Mill Road in Sheridan, and I was at my field, and the wind was blowing straight from the west to the east, and the farm worker came with the tractor with the sprayer. I'm like, man, I'm going to get out of here, even though my field was to the west of where he was spraying, and the wind was blowing from west to east. I just didn't want to be around there. You figure swirling winds, I mean, there could be a lot of it. He turned on the sprayer. He was an African-American guy. Turned on the sprayer, and the wind blew from behind him. His arm was coated with this milky white stuff. It got on his face, and he just sort of like wiped it off and kept on going. I mean, he's going to work for probably hours with that all over his skin.
Well, I've done quite a bit of reading, and the names of things, the names of products are hard to remember because there's so many of them. But apparently there are toxic products. I'm also talking about, in the textile industry too, that makes our cloth, and apparently there are some things that are so toxic that just a drop of it landing on your skin can kill you.
Right. Well, I read up about paraquat. I guess it's used worldwide as a defoliant, so kind of like they use it in Mexico and stuff like that. But they say that in those countries, they say that everybody knows, like if you want to commit suicide, a small amount of that will kill you dead real quick. So, and in the you're talking about people living on the edges of fields. Over 30 years ago, I knew people that were boycotting California table grapes back then because they said that you could not work in the table grape industry within a year. You have cancer because I mean these migrant workers are living in tents on the sides of the fields. Everything's getting sprayed there. It's in the water they're probably using. It's all in the soil. It's being sprayed around. Everything gets coated with. And I know someone mentioned to me that a local surgeon in Fredonia, and it was the farmer who sold him the land, and he took out one row of grapes to put his driveway back and built this big beautiful house back in the grapes. The farmer actually told me, he said, I can't believe that as a doctor, he would want his house right in amongst the grapes. I mean, it looks nice, but think of it on a warm, sunny day. You have your windows open in your house, and the farmer comes through, sprays the field. Everything in your house is coated with that spray. And I had a neighbor on Webster Road that my one friend said, oh, it must be just so great in the fall to have the smell of the grapes around it. Sure, I said, it's just 5 months of spraying that you have to deal with to get 2 weeks of that nice smell. And she's like, they spray those grapes? I'm like, of course they spray them. And the end of the row of grapes ended here, and about 15 feet up the road, that was where their wellhead was for their water for the house. So, you're spraying and spraying and spraying, and all that's going into the groundwater, and then you're bathing in it and probably drinking it too. And I know I told you before, my friend Craig, he was a conventional grape grower, and in his 30s, he and his wife started getting tumors all over different places in their body. They had to keep going in for surgery after surgery after surgery. And he asked the doctors, like, where's this coming from? They're like, well, I don't know, just keep coming and get tested. He said he was filling up his spray tank one day, and he's reading the dangers of this stuff, and he's like, so I spray this stuff every couple of weeks, and I have to spray it every couple of weeks because when it rains, it gets washed off. It's got to be going into the groundwater, and we're drinking it and bathing in it. So that day he told his wife, he says, from now on, he says, we're drinking bottled water, okay? They never got another tumor after that. So
After they quit drinking their well water?
After they quit drinking their well water, which was surrounded by grapes. And that was the thing in his mind that made him go to organic. It wasn't like he was like, no, everything is going to be organic. And I remember him telling me years ago, he's like, everybody complains about Roundup. He says, really, Roundup's just salt with a sticker on it. I'm like,
oh, no.
Yeah, but it's been associated with birth defects and a lot of other health issues too. And but yeah, I just think that everybody's so it's so ingrained in our society. Everybody just thinks that you have to have it.
Unfortunately, yeah.
I got in an argument on Facebook with a friend, Penzies Spice. Oh, they love Penzies because he does a lot of stuff for society. He donates money to these different causes. I'm like, but there isn't one organic herb in the entire store. Oh, some guy's like, well, you don't understand. He said, every country in the world has pesticide spraying programs. I'm like, well, maybe that's true, but they aren't now. Oh, no, you don't understand. It's necessary and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, all right, I'm not going to continue to argue here. And I noticed later that the person who made the post loved one of his comments. I wasn't going to comment again, but I looked. And the guy said, well, see, I was trained as a pesticide specialist. I'm like, okay. So now he believes that everything has to be sprayed, or we just couldn't live without pesticides. It just wouldn't happen. And of course, I believe we've said this before, but the country of Bhutan has committed to 100% organic. They do not use any sprays in the entire country.
They also put a lot of importance in Bhutan on the happiness of their citizens also.
Right.
Now, Bill sent me a couple of messages on my phone that I happened to find last night. And one of them was something about, it was some websites listed. I haven't had a chance to look the stuff up, but one of them was something about the 10 most toxic items at the garden center - gardening equipment. Now, would you tell them about what kinds of gardening equipment?
I was actually kind of surprised myself when I read the article. I'm like, this is all kind of new to me.
It sounds like they're talking about tools, I'm thinking,
well,
when
actually,
I saw
they said
message.
like the hose that you use, really, they said make sure your hose is made of rubber, because they said
100% rubber.
Right, because they said sometimes they use PVC plastic in those, and if they're using PVC, then that actually will put plastic chemicals into your garden soil while you're watering. They say definitely don't drink water out of the hose unless it's run for a considerable amount of time, so you're not like drinking the phthalates or whatever is in it. But they even said the gloves that people wear in the gardens will often have some toxic chemicals that will release again into your soil. They said not kneeling pads, but the kneelers, like the thing that you have like a foam pad that you kneel on, they said those will actually contaminate your soil with certain things. But they even said like the plastic like ornaments that you might put in your garden, those also contaminate your garden soil too. But yeah, that was I just like really never thought about that. I don't use any of those things. I rarely wear gloves. I have used knee pads, but never those kneeler things. I just kneel in the dirt.
Yeah.
Sometimes kind of rough on the knees, but
yeah, especially if you're wearing shorts, so that your knees are not covered with clothing.
Oh yeah, and then you kneel on a rock or something. It's like
Yeah.
But that was a completely different concept to me. I mean, I was just looking for more like I was thinking more like sprays and things like that people use, but. Yeah, it said, really, I mean, pretty much, keep the plastic out of the garden for the most part, I guess. And especially, like they said, the hose, the gloves, I know the kneeling pads, and they said even like lawn ornaments were big that way too. But yeah, and I know one of my friends was complaining that she heard that they were using like Roundup around the Fredonia campus. I said, well, there's a farm down the street from me. And I see they plant like acres and acres and acres of corn. They always spray that with Roundup. It's Roundup Ready corn, and then they spray it. And they're literally the edge of the farm to the Canadaway Creek, and it's downhill to Canadaway Creek. It's probably 100 yards tops. So, that all ends up in the creek, ends up in Lake Erie, and eventually goes out Lake Ontario to the St. Lawrence Seaway out into the ocean. So,
And then it goes, some of the waterways go into like the Allegheny River and the Mississippi River. It makes its way all the way down south.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
so
Lake Chautauqua Lake drains goes to the Gulf of Mexico. I know even up my way. I mean, up like in Arkwright that way. I mean, my one friend used to live on what was one of a continental divide. The rain and snow that melted on his side of the hill would go into the Canada Way, go into Lake Erie, and then out into the Atlantic eventually. But on the other side, it went into the Conowongo Creek and eventually into the Mississippi. So it can go either way. But yeah, I know Canada has banned a lot of these chemicals too. But here, in this country, we still have a lot of it, and I don't see a whole lot of things, slowing down as far as farmers, the big farmers doing it. They say that really doesn't even help. It really hardly helps to use the sprays, but because it's all like big business, big agribusiness, they want to make sure that they, everything, it's weed-free, loaded with chemicals, but, it's all about profit. And there was the one article I read said it, and it's a little ridiculous to say that, we need all this stuff to produce the food for the growing population. And
but what about all of the centuries that they didn't have all of those chemicals?
Well, but you could say you could argue that there's more people now. But the fact is that there's plenty of food on the whole planet for people. It's distribution of the food that's the problem. It isn't like we don't really need to grow more food right now. That is not really the problem, or that we don't have enough. There's enough. It's just distribution is the problem. And I wish I could remember the name of the book, but it was about the myths of of starvation, and that it's not about the lack of food. It's just the distribution.
Yeah,
of food.
yeah.
Well, you see, like sometimes in Africa, we drop off food that's supposed to go to help people, and then the militants will take all the food, and the people don't get any of it. So it's not really about producing more. It's more about distributing what we have.
Yeah, it's too bad there's so many wicked and evil people in the world. All of these people that are standing in the way of other people thriving.
Right,
So,
right. And, again, like we could say that, like here with all our chemical companies that they're making, billions and billions in profits, and it's poisoning the planet. I mean,
I know.
Stuff is building up, and, cancer rates are climbing, and like we're saying, children are being born with cancer now. And, people are like, where is it coming from? It's like, well, it's like, I can't remember. I was going to look it up. The amount of tons of pesticide that are used in this country and the world. It's literally like it's a lot. I mean, it's like per person. It's like way more than you would possibly even think that was even possible. But and it's not going away. I mean, they just don't degrade.
And like when I was reading that book, The World According to Monsanto. It was amazing. It seems like they get these contracts with these farmers, and once the farmer signs, gets involved with one of these companies, it's like the company owns that farmer.
Oh yeah. Like my one friend said, he said, "Well, we have to spray. We have to spray." I go, what do you mean you have to? Well, if there's a crop failure and you didn't spray, you won't get any government money. So it's all tied together. The chemical companies lobby with the government, so the government promotes the chemicals. And well, if you want to be protected by your farmer's insurance, you have to use the chemicals. So, and it's like, like our Cornell Cooperative Extensions, everything is owned by, maybe not Monsanto anymore, but by Bayer. So it's all like, that's what they're teaching in the schools. Like, these are the chemicals. This is what you have to use. So then when they go out to farmers, well, this is the chemical you need to use. So it's just like locked into the entire system, kind of like medicine and pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I guess the original idea for like chemotherapy drugs for cancer patients came from something called mustard gas that the military was using for something that had to do with warfare. Had you heard about it?
Oh yeah, mustard gas was used in World War I. In fact, a story from my friend and a pollution control inspector, he said there was a new development that was built somewhere around Syracuse, and people were complaining about this black sludge that was coming up through their basement drains. So he went out there to do a little investigation. He said he found these barrels like buried, like, you know, somebody had like taken axes and chopped into the barrels and just buried them out there. So he got the lid off of one of these and said, oh great, he took the lid off. It's like, it's all drained into the soil there anyway, but he got the lid off it, took it back to his office and was able to examine it. And he went back and checked the history of this land. Turns out that it had been used for testing mustard gas during World War I, this particular area near Syracuse. Then, because, you know, I'm sure nothing would grow there or anything like that, somebody bought it and they used it as a toxic waste dump for 30 years. And then they just covered it all over with dirt and trees all grew up in it. And this developer was looking for some cheap land. They're like, sure, why don't you have this? Well, you know, been sitting fallow for 25 years, so he just started building houses on it. And I know there was some guy who was originally from Syracuse, worked his entire career in Florida, bought one of these homes from this developer, had actually stayed there a few summers. When my friend went and did tests, he sampled the stuff coming up through the floor drain, tested the water. He said the water had so much, I believe, again, it was arsenic and some other radioactive compounds. He said it wasn't even safe to take a bath or a shower in the water. He said certainly wasn't safe enough to drink. Well, now this guy bought this place. He's had it for a few years. He's ready to retire. He's not going to be able to sell it to anybody. Nobody's going to want to buy a house that's in an area like that. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. And we know about, like, you know, what is that, Love Canal and those places too. They said that, you know, they didn't think that the amounts would really affect people, but then, you know, you get these huge spikes in cancer rates and stuff like that.
Yeah, there was something called pernicious anemia that some of the people in the neighborhood were getting, and it was showing up in children, and normally children don't get pernicious anemia or something like that. So it was that, what was her name? Lois Gibbs, was that her name? That was so... Somebody made a movie about it at one time, and I remember that movie star named Marsha Mason played the part of the woman activist who was so instrumental in getting people moved out of that neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just kind of surprising when you look at, like, you probably remember going into Buffalo and like around like Lackawanna.
Oh
and
yeah,
back in the day,
and the air would be really stinky. Yeah.
You'd always see the smoke from all those big coke ovens and stuff over there.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that area was, you know, industrial from probably way before I was born until I don't know how many years ago they stopped all that over there. But yeah, I mean, it's we end up living in an environment of all the stuff that's used around us, all the chemicals, all the smog, all the smoke from stacks and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess the topic is the stuff we use around our yards. But I mean, pollution is, well, and I think I mentioned this before, that this doctor, alternative doctor, she is an MD. She has 5 medical licenses, but she practices more alternative medicine. Dr. Margaret Mitchell. She's all into organic, and she knows that I grow organically. And she said to me once when I went in for an appointment, she goes, do you realize that if you eat all organic foods, she goes, you're eating 19 carcinogenic compounds in every meal?
Because of all the chemicals that have been used in the world. It's just so the earth is just so overloaded.
Yeah, well, she said, but she said if you eat conventional, 96 carcinogenic compounds. So it's almost
a lot worse.
Almost 4 times. Worse. Well, it is exactly 4 times.
Where does this doctor practice?
I don't think she does anymore. She
retired?
I think she's just teaching now. I think she gave up her practice some years ago. I know I saw her in 07, 08. Maybe 9.
Was she around this area when she was practicing?
More Williamsville.
Williamsville?
Yeah, but yeah, she I said, so where does it come from? She goes, well, I mean, everything's so polluted. She goes, the ground has carcinogenic compounds. The soil, no matter where you are, has toxic chemicals in it. She goes, the rainwater is bringing in toxic chemicals, and she said, the air is full of it. So the air, the soil, the water is all contaminated, no matter what. So I had a guy once say to me, he was camping on land where I was farming, and he's like, so you claim all your stuff is organic? I'm like, it is organic. Well, he says, what do you do about the rain? I'm like, rain is good. What do you mean? Well, I mean, how could you, I'm like, so you're expecting me to maybe put up a canopy and a greenhouse over the top of my field and then maybe bring in spring water to water everything? People complain about the cost of organic food now. It'd be like you'd be paying $5 for one lettuce leaf if you had to water it with, purified water. I mean, I'd love to, but I'm not going to keep the rain from hitting my crops.
Yeah, there's not much you can do about it, is there?
Yeah.
No.
Well, I mean, I guess you could.
You don't want to put a
it'd
roof over your garden.
Well, even Elliot Coleman told me when he came back from Europe the one time, he said they were at this Dutch farm, and he's like, man, he says that there's a little space between the shed and the fence. He said they got bunnies in there. He said there's another little bigger space behind the barn and next to a fence. He said they've got goats in there. He said they are so efficient with everything. They planted pine trees along the road, so any of the emissions from the cars would filter through like rows of pine trees before it would ever get to the farm. And then Elliot noticed there was this like nasty, like polluted canal, and Elliot's like, what? It's like, he said, we need water. He said, so we have to pump water out of the canal to irrigate our fields. He said, I mean, there's no other way. He says, maybe we drill a bunch of wells and stuff like that, but it would be so cost prohibitive that it just isn't worth it. So he said, sometimes you just have to accept where you are. I know my friend was planning on putting a farm in his family's place, and it's right next to the Obrachta salvage yard in Dunkirk, and they were going to have a test done for to see if he could get an organic certification. Well, they were taking, this goes back to PCBs, they were taking old transformers and crushing them with the car crusher, and some of that stuff leached into his parents' land, and he was making this big deal about, you could have the most pristine place out in the mountains, and some chemical truck could have an accident and dump it near you, and then what? It's like, well, but you have to understand, they have to start someplace. They can't just like say, well, we just cleared this toxic waste dump, and now we're going to grow organic vegetables here. So
yeah, apparently somehow modern farming practices have caused the soil to become depleted also.
Right.
And when I had a thyroid problem 18 years ago, I did a bunch of reading on thyroid problems and found that literally 25% of all women have a thyroid problem. Mm-hmm. And it's caused by and most of it is caused by a lack of iodine in the modern diet.
Right.
And I think that has something to do with the soil having become so depleted.
Well, I've read that. I think around here, I don't know if it's just the Great Lakes, but they call it the goiter belt because of the lack of iodine. But I always thought that was because we don't eat as much fish and seaweed.
I was going to mention that because since I had the thyroid problem, I eat seaweed fairly often. Mm-hmm. In fact, I've only eaten in a Japanese restaurant a couple of times, but both times, what I've ordered is seaweed salad.
Yeah, well, I love
yep. And they make it taste really good somehow. Mm-hmm. And
I know it sounds kind of weird, but I mean it is good. I mean
it
is
like
really
good,
crunchy
and it's a really good source of iodine. Mm-hmm. So the iodized. A friend was kind of arguing with me on the phone one day. He was saying something about, I was telling him these things about, he seemed to think that because of iodine in salt, that there shouldn't be there's not supposed to be a lot of trouble with thyroid problems.
Right.
So why is there? if that salt with
Right.
with a little bit of iodine in it is doing any good, you know?
Right.
And besides that, I heard I think it was an herbalist or somebody telling me that actually the iodine they put in salt is actually synthetic, and
Okay.
and it can turn into plastic inside of your body.
Huh.
So.
I do know I read that they said if there was ever like a thermonuclear explosion, that's where a lot of people do get sick, is that you will absorb radioactive iodine. So they said if you have iodine at home and you know there's been a blast, they say take your socks and shoes off and paint the bottom of your feet with the iodine, so then your body will be loaded with iodine. You won't be absorbing
I won't be the radioactive stuff. Yeah.
Right, right. But yeah, I mean, I don't know about that with the iodine and salt, and I don't know about you, but I mean, I don't eat iodized salt either. I mean, I eat sea salt or Celtic sea salt or
right. That's what we do also, and I don't even use very much salt because salt can cause things.
See,
like,
a lot of people think
you
that.
know,
You hear that in the media, but I mean,
anyway.
my doctor told me, he said, Bill, he said, your sodium levels are low. He said, your blood pressure is perfect. Don't be afraid of the salt shaker. And that, if you ever read the book by...
When I was telling this friend of mine, explaining to him about how just having iodized salt is not going to prevent you from getting thyroid problems, he goes, well, my doctors never said anything like that to me. And I said, well, they're not going to.
Yeah, they're
you
not
know?
trained
They
in that
don't
either.
even know. They don't even know. Doctors don't have to take any nutrition classes. They're not
Right.
required to take nutrition classes.
But back to the salt thing, there's a doctor, I read his book, and the book is called Your Body's Many Cries for Water. He said it's ridiculous for people to limit their salt. He said the problem is people don't drink enough water, so the salt does cause a problem. But if you eat enough salt and drink enough water, it flushes it out of your system. I eat tons of
well,
salt.
people are drinking alcoholic beverages and sugary beverages, soda pop, and all those kinds of things that, you know, really aren't good for you.
Right.
And instead of drinking water, I mean, some people, I had one young man quite a number of years ago tell me that him and his wife would drink a gallon of milk every day, and I'm going, you shouldn't be drinking a gallon of milk every day. You should be drinking lots of water is what you should be drinking. I mean, really, you know. And
yeah, I eat very little dairy, if any, anymore. But yeah, I had a friend who he would do that. He would drink about a gallon of milk every day, and then he ended up having a lot of kidney stone problems after that.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny though too that people will think that going to a fast food place is healthy too. And I was telling somebody
they do? People actually think
they
that?
think that's good for you. I read someplace where I mean, this isn't even that bad, but the Wendy's Dave's Double, it's just a double cheeseburger, has 850 calories. Someone guessed it was 1,500. When I said, take a guess what that is, it's 850. But sometimes the beverages, like I've read someplace that like Dairy Queen, like one of their big blizzard drinks or something like that, the drinks can be 1,400, 1,500, 1,800, even 2,300 calories for a drink.
For just the beverage, and you're not really supposed to be eating many more calories than that for the whole day.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like a bodybuilder or a big power lifter or something like that, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day. So even that drink would be half of your calories if you're eating, 4,000 calories a day. But yeah, and but I know one friend of mine, I'm a little concerned. I haven't heard from since like last July, and he was like, he's big, and he was always had like two beverages wherever he went, and diabetes so bad that in his 50s he was getting his cortisone injections in his eyeballs because the diabetes was making his eyesight go. I don't think he's been able to drive much distance in close to 10 years.
Well, the old-fashioned way of drinking coffee, I'm actually not a coffee drinker myself,
I can't.
but I can't have caffeine because it makes me have panic attacks if I do. But anyways, the old-fashioned way, you know, like either just black or maybe with a little milk and sugar or something in it. But nowadays they have these really high-calorie lattes and all kinds of things with all kinds of really high,
900 calories in your cup of coffee.
High calorie-dense things, you know, ingredients in them. It's just totally different than it used to be.
Right.
Although we've kind of gotten away from our subject here.
Coffee.
Yeah.
I guess it is a toxic chemical you use in your house, but
coffee is.
Yeah, right. No, I with you. I used to drink a little bit of it, but I quit, and then I probably have not had a sip in like a dozen years or something like that. But yeah, I don't get panic attacks, but I just like shake. I'm just like it's just not comfortable, so I stopped. But I take the cordyceps mushroom extract, which gives you like gentle, sustained energy.
Yeah. It's not a. What you get from caffeine is not a calm energy.
Right.
You know,
Definitely
it's like,
jittery.
there are certain things, like certain foods, like for instance, celery. Celery will give you a calm energy. It will give you plenty of energy without making you nervous, and actually it has a relaxing effect. People don't understand that you can have plenty of energy and yet be relaxed at the same time. People seem to associate relaxing with being tired sometimes,
right.
I think. Yeah.
I know, I do know. I had a friend, she asked me, she always drank her coffee, and I was going in the house for something. She said, "Hey, you want to grab me a cup?" I'm like, "Yeah." She goes 3 sugars and a half of a cream. I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I went to where she had her coffee maker, and she had a tablespoon there. I'm like, 3 heaping tablespoons of sugar into 1 cup of coffee and a half of the non-dairy creamer or something like that. I'm like, I mean, 1 level teaspoon or tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So if she had 3 level tablespoons, that's 9 teaspoons of sugar in 1 cup. But they were heaping. I would have to say it could be double that. I mean, 15 to maybe 18 teaspoons of sugar in a cup of coffee, and this is like multiple cups a day too. But then she also said to me one time in the morning, she's like, "How much coffee did you drink this morning?" Because of my energy levels. I'm like, I haven't had a sip in years. I just don't drink this stuff.
But getting back to the harmful effects of lawn and garden chemicals, but you know, I was just reading an article the other day about the cooking utensils that people use in their kitchen, and I've known this for a long time, but you know, it was refreshing my mind on it, the article, and it talked about all of these toxic chemicals that are in the non-stick cookware. That's another thing that's very toxic, and people like to buy that kind of stuff because of the non-stickness, and but it's highly toxic.
Right. Well, I know we talked about cleaning chemicals and stuff on another show, but I mean
We
a lot of
did,
the stuff that you use in your house is just as bad as a lot of the stuff that you used outside too. And I know some people will actually use like a pesticide in their house that says only for outside use. It's like, if it says it in the can, I don't think you should be using it in your house. But I know some people are like, well, it works and I'm going to use it. It's like, okay.
Yes, it kills.
Yeah.
That's what it's made to do. It's a poison, and it's meant to kill things.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things I read coming in here was that they say that if it's something that will kill weeds, something that will kill bugs, it will harm you too. But I know a lot of people too with the gardening. We didn't mention 7 dust, but I know a lot of people. Oh no,
7 dust?
7 dust. Yeah, I don't even know what's in it.
I don't know what that is.
It's nasty stuff. But I'm all organic. Just a little 7 dust. That's all I use. It's like, You're not organic if you're using Sevin dust.
It's highly toxic.
Yes.
Then. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know what's in it exactly because obviously I've never used it.
I'm thinking if people didn't use all of these toxic things, we might live to be 150 years old.
Oh, the Hunses.
Or 200 years old.
The Hunses lived to average age 125 when they first found them in the early 1900s. They were completely isolated from like travel and stuff, and they didn't really have any influence. But now they eat the American diet. They live as long as we do. They live about 80, 85 years or something like that.
Yeah, right.
I've seen pictures. I've seen a picture of a guy who was 151 years old, and he quit riding horseback at 149 because his doctor said, if you fell and broke your hip, it might kill you. So he stopped riding horseback at 150 or 149 years old. There was another guy who was 168, and you think like, oh my, how would these people look after all this? They look like somebody in our society that's like 70.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They don't look like they're 170. They look like they're 70.
Well, if you see somebody, you might run into somebody if you haven't seen them in a few years. But they always smoked cigarettes when they were younger, and they might be the same age as you.
Right.
But their faces will be totally full of really deep lines.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I ran into somebody that I knew was my age maybe 5 years ago, I think it was, because we went to school together, and I knew that she had always smoked, and I was shocked at the way that she looked.
Yeah,
because
you're right. I mean, I think that does age you a lot, but I think, also heavy alcohol consumption too.
That
I think,
too.
I think, if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, you're probably not drinking enough water, so that you're dehydrated.
Right. Well, actually, things like that actually have those kinds of beverages actually do have a dehydrating effect on the body.
Absolutely, yeah. They're diuretic, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And, I'm sure, other reasons. I'm sure it's not that horrible, for you, but I know it does slow certain systems in your body and cause problems. And, again, too, I know like one friend of mine was arguing, he's like, people make a big deal about preservatives in beer. There's no preservatives in beer. I'm like, well, I know for a fact one thing. Miller High Life says right on the bottle, no additives, no preservatives, all natural, and there are over 50 additives and preservatives in Miller High Life. If you see a clear beer bottle, light will actually degrade the quality of the beer. So that's why most beer bottles have traditionally been brown to block out the light. But if they're a clear beer bottle like a Miller, Corona, that they have extra stuff in them. There's actually cobalt in Miller beer, which is highly toxic. So, but the thing is like, well, the people say, well, how can they say that if it's full of chemicals? Well, there's labeling laws. As long as the total amount of chemicals is under a certain amount and the amount of each individual one is under a certain amount, they can say no additives, no preservatives.
Right, and then there's things that aren't. There's no laws controlling them that gets put into foods and things because it hasn't been researched to see if it has any bad effects on a human. Then they are allowed to put it in and call their product all natural, and they'll even have it in their list of ingredients. So
I do know too that this was Monsanto, but they were trying to push through a bill a number of years ago, but they wanted to start using what was used in Vietnam, Agent Orange, in a defoliant. And it's like, and I have clients who were in Vietnam and the health problems that they ended up with after being exposed to Agent Orange, and now you can spray it in your own yard.
And you can get it something called 2,4 that they're calling 2,4-D now. That they're putting in some of these sprays and things that people use in their yard is an ingredient that was used in Agent Orange. And those guys not only had health problems themselves, but if they had children, if they fathered a child, the child would be born with problems also. I seem to remember that. I remember somebody that I used to know telling me that their son was born with some problems because the husband was exposed to Agent Orange. So.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you think about, like we were saying earlier, I mean, a baby born today could have 160 carcinogenic chemicals in its body. Well, where did that come from? It didn't come from the hospital. It came from both parents.
They found it in mother's milk.
Right.
Breastfeeding mothers, yes. I hate to say it, but guess what time it is? This was such an interesting topic, and I'm so glad we did it. And I want you and the viewing audience to think very seriously about, if you're using these products, to please discontinue. Not just for yourselves, but for future generations.
Right.
So that the human race doesn't become extinct, please. See you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.